Thank you. Okay, we're going to call our special budget meeting, special meeting of council to order. Thank you everyone for coming. We will first recognize that we are holding our meeting on the territories of the Sechot and Hoopachesit First Nations. Would somebody like to move approval of our agenda?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
Second, Madam Mayor.
Any questions or additions or changes? Nope. Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Okay, we have Councillor Poon joining us by telephone, so we will see how this works. Could you just move so that if we need to, we can put it on the mic. Okay. All right. So today is our first budget meeting for the 2019 to 2023 five-year financial plan. We want to thank the people who came out to join us for it. We are going to start with, this is going to be a higher level overview of the budget today. We're probably not going to go into a ton of detail, but the CAO and I wanted to bring everybody, the new councillors, up to date on some of the, how we got to where we are today. Stop. Councillor Paulson would like me to remind everybody to please turn off their cell phones or not let their cell phones interrupt our meetings. So I think with that, I will call on the CAO. I think the first thing we were going to do was just give a general overview of the operating and capital budget. CAO. Okay.
Madam Mayor, Council. Madam Mayor, when we said that we would tag team this, I didn't think you would say tag you're it right away, but here we go.
That's what we discussed.
Whatever you like, Madam Mayor. Yes, Council, this is our first budget meeting for 2019. We find ourselves in a fairly unique situation where we have a newly elected council. You haven't yet had an opportunity to develop your strategic plan from which staff would generally take direction and bring you a draft budget that we think addresses your strategic direction. So we find ourselves in a situation where we have to preempt your plan with a budget because we're obligated to adopt a budget by, I believe, May 15th of the year. A five-year plan we have to get submitted to the province. So what we've done, let me preface that by saying council's in charge. So whatever you would like, staff will do. If you would like us to throw out this draft document and come back with a different one, tell us how that should look and we'll bring you a different one. So our assumption, if you like, probably not the best word, but we're operating on the assumption that the best place to start with this draft financial plan is to follow the previous five-year financial plan. So the previous plan was 2017 to 2021. And no, it was 2018. I'm looking at last year's slide. 2018 to 2022. This year is going to be 2019 to 2023. So what we've done is we've taken the five-year financial plan from last year, added a new year on the end, and dropped off the year of 2018. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. And we think it's probably a good starting point from which you can decide how to influence it going forward. The mayor asked that I present to you a PowerPoint that I showed council last year, which is problematic because I presented it to a different council. But I think the mayor would like you to see that PowerPoint because she thinks it'll help council understand what was the direction that drove the previous five-year financial plan. So I can walk you through some of maybe the first third or so of that presentation. That would be.
I'll just add to that,
yes,
since
thanks.
I know I was supposed to add to that somewhat. I think it's important for this council to understand how we got to the draft budget that we're at today. As we all know, we are a different council than the council was here a year ago, but council is a continuing body. So the direction of the last council is the direction of this council until we say otherwise, essentially. I think the last council provided some really good budget input, and that's where we're working from today. There's definitely parts of the budget that different councillors didn't agree with, but in general, I think it was good input, and that's where we're working from. So I'll just summarize, and then you can maybe go into more detail. Our last budget focused on holding operational spending to minimal increases so that we could find new money for infrastructure renewal, which I think most people could agree is sound direction. Going forward, or the last budget focused a lot on holding spending, or in some cases even reducing, with minimal cuts to service. I think going forward, I want us to look at how we can hold our spending and see that driving innovation, and looking at our dollars that we're spending, trying to improve what we're doing rather than looking at things from a lens of just cutting to have a lower budget. So I thought it would be very helpful for the CAO to present the last 5-year plan, or not the plan, but kind of what drove us to those decisions, because there's a lot of things in there that I think are very valuable for us to think of going forward. We don't necessarily have to follow the direction of the last council, but I think it's important to be aware of how we got to it, and then we can decide how we want to move forward from there. So CAO, I'll let you back to your plan.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, it's probably important for council to know that this direction was first implemented starting in 2017. So in the budget, the 5-year plan that was adopted in 2017, we held at the operational level, department level, we held the direction to managers was bring back a budget that showed no more than a 5% increase over a 5-year period. So essentially 1% per year, but they could have more in one year and less in a different year. Excuse me, I'm gonna have to, I have a man cold, and it's just about killing me. Yeah, yes, yes. So it's just so I don't lose my throat. Sorry. Okay. So we started in 2017, and we brought council a budget that showed that, and council put money back into a few areas because they didn't want to make the reductions that we had to make, the reductions in service that we had to make to get to that budget direction. So we ended up with 3 departments that were their budgets increased more than 5% over 5 years, and those were police, fire, and economic development. And that was how that budget approach was intended to work, was that we had a starting point from which council then massaged it to make it their own. Then in 2018, excuse me, we followed a similar direction, and we brought back the same 5-year financial plan, or 4 years of that plan, with a few minor changes, and we made this presentation to council. So I'll walk you through it, and I think it might help understand where the previous council was developing their vision from. So creating, of course, a vibrant waterfront community, which was a cornerstone of the strategic plan for previous council. We wanted to continue with high quality services, being fiscally responsible, and investing in a sustainable investment in infrastructure. Through leading and partnering is one example of, the mayor mentioned innovation. I guess I'd like to say on behalf of staff, if I can be so bold as to speak for staff, 1% a year isn't enough to keep up with inflation. So it's basically starvation increases, and it drives a reduction in service. And hopefully it drives innovation, as the mayor mentioned. So if you don't have enough resources year to year to continue doing what you've always done, the way you've always done it, then by default it has to drive innovation. And it's a very blunt way to drive innovation, but it's the way that we exercised over the last few years. And we had a few successful examples of innovation, and we had a lot of examples of belt tightening, which wasn't, I don't think, the intent. And longer term, belt tightening doesn't work. Innovation works, and reducing services strategically can work, but those are decisions of council to actually reduce services. So council looked at 3 critical issues that were facing the city. That is a population and a tax base that was not experiencing growth, either of those. And we felt that the money we were directing to infrastructure renewal in the city was tracking lower and lower each year, which meant that we weren't keeping up with what should be increasing costs for infrastructure renewal. And our funds, our revenue was basically being eaten up by the cost to operate on a day-to-day basis. And the third factor that council regarded as critical was that the city has a fairly heavy reliance on industrial tax base. Not as heavy as we've had in the past, but still we're a community that largely depends on that taxation revenue. And as we know, the industry, the forest industry, has had tough years, and we've seen other communities lose their industrial tax base and tax revenue, so we thought that we should be moving towards more sustainability. So the direction was, in 2018, was stay the course from 2017, a gradual redirection of heavy industry taxes toward infrastructure and reserve funds. So in 2018, taxes went up 3% across the board, including industry. So it wasn't a reduction of industrial taxes, but the attempt was a redirection of those funds to infrastructure. Council wanted to hold the tax increases at 3% or lower, and where possible, hold the cost increases to operate on a department-by-department basis to no more than 1% per year. So in 2017, as I said, we held departments to a 5% over 5 years. It didn't make, so the following year in 2018, we didn't say you have to be at 1%. We said you have to commit to those numbers. So the numbers you showed us in 2017, show us how you're going to meet those numbers in 2018. And we've done the same thing again this year. We said the numbers you showed us in 2017 and 18, show us how you're going to meet those numbers that you projected for 2019. And that's what this draft budget contains. And in theory, the theories are nice because they're so easy and clean. If we maintained a direction like that, we would be in the sunshine in 12 years. We would have the same amount of money going into infrastructure as we derive from industrial taxes, so we'd be golden. And we'd be where every community wants to be. The hard part is staying the course, right? And life gets in the way. So the 2018 process, budget process, was like the 2017, but different than the years previous. And excuse me, this is a point I'd like us to spend a bit of time on. Because we had direction from council, and especially in 2018, it was the same direction as the previous year. So council had a chance to debate that direction, and they did, and they adhered to it. There wasn't, because they'd given clear direction, and staff had brought a draft budget that met that clear direction, there wasn't the need for council to go through the operating budget line by line. And I can tell you, and for those of you who have been around these chambers for a few years, sometimes our previous practice kind of looked like one by one department managers would come up here and present on behalf of their department, basically defend their budget request. And there could at times be a perception that those were staff wish lists, the budgets. And council felt, I think, like they had to try to hold the line and represent the taxpayers. And the result was that council would go line by line through various operating budgets, looking for chances to maybe make reductions, or at least ensuring that there was good value for dollars. And it put staff in a defensive position. So it certainly didn't put us around the same round table. And it was a bit of a contentious process. The last 2 years have been a lot more collaborative. I feel like staff is bringing council budget that reflects their direction, for which council doesn't need to try to poke holes in, because I can tell you, I've already done that. I've met with every manager, and pretty much every one of them has said, I can't do this. And I've said, well, show me how you're going to, and show me what's going to fall off, and we'll tell council what falls off. So I don't think you need to go line by line through the operating budget. If council wishes to, this is your show. We can do that, and we'll bring you all the answers to the questions that you have. We did use an e-town hall format in 2018. We're not envisioning doing that this year, but if council wants to use that format, we certainly can. I think we might be near, no, we're not quite at the end here. 5-year plan highlights, the same, like I said, we stayed to the same numbers. We added a 1% lift on the last year of the plan, 2022. And we increased, the 5-year plan was projected to increase our infrastructure spending, or our capital spending, by 300% over that 5-year term. And like I say, budgets are fine and predictions are nice, but living through them is difficult. And we have diverted some of those funds already to other emerging priorities. So that was in 2016 and 17. You can see what the tax increases were. Money going to capital. So I've said infrastructure in this slide. The mayor has reminded me that that was capital, not necessarily infrastructure. So we can discuss what infrastructure really means to each person. In 2018, we were in the draft plan. We were on track to a $1.2 million expenditure on infrastructure. I don't have the figure for you today on what it actually was. And in that plan, we were projecting to go up by those numbers that you see there. And if we show that graphically, up until 2017, our capital spending had been trailing off and way below what a community this size should be spending. And so if we add in the 5 years of that 5-year plan, 2018 through 2022, you can see that it was projected to rise up toward where it should be. And maybe a little embarrassing now to look at a projection of 12 years. But if we took a course like that and stayed that course for 12 years and nothing got in the way, no emerging priorities got in the way of that spending, that we could be north of $5 million a year available for capital expenditures in each year. So that, Madam Mayor, was, and after that, in the presentation, we went line by line, or department by department, in terms of what the projected budgets were. So does that help tell us how we got to that, how council got to that budget direction?
I think that's very helpful. Are there questions from council? Councillor Solda?
I just want to say, because I was here in the past and we did do the line by line, and which is fine, and departmental presentations. And the thing with departmental presentations, after so many years, you get the same lines and you get the same thing and you hear it, right? But sometimes it's good to either we do a focus on Facebook or something of each department, because there's people in the public who do not know what exactly does the public works do, where and what they do. Something has to be made public, and those presentations were good in that sense. So maybe there's another way that we can highlight each department and say, hey, this is what they do. This is where your tax dollars are going in public works, the fire department. And I think that's really important for the public, Madam Mayor.
I think that's a great point, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, a part of budget meetings. We also have that information in our annual report, and there could be other ways for us to highlight it, what each department does, what their budget is, what goes into that, and what projects they're focused on. I think in general, what we've heard over the last month or so, we certainly heard it at our committee of the whole, was people want to understand better what our processes are, and want to have easier ways to engage with the city. So we might want to put some thought into how we can get that information out beyond just through the budget process. And we could certainly, do that as a part of the budget process as well. But I think that could just be an ongoing process. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Paulson?
I just want to make a comment. We talked about the departmental roundtables that we had, and I feel bad that they were perceived as being confrontational to begin with, but I think the last 2 years were really good. What I found out of from those is an opportunity to discuss the projects and for us to become aware of exactly what the projects were, and a chance to discuss, well, it's a large project. Can we allocate a portion this year and a portion next year, and just kind of how we arrive at those figures and numbers. But personally, I found that from an educational point of view, I found that really beneficial for me. And I also found that last year, I think in particular, the dialogue and the back and forth was very productive, rather than being protective or confrontational. I thought that it was very productive. And just a quick question, and just speculating, but looking at your graph here, and in 2029 you're at $6 million. I'm kind of curious to find out what the actual long-term capital needs would be. Would we be eating up that full $6 million in 2029? Like, I know it's an abstract discussion to have, but what would be our actual needs, in particular for infrastructure, as we move forward through into 2029? And that's a great figure, $6 million, and if we could get there, it'd be, I'm sure our Works Department would be pretty happy.
So Kathy Rothwell, Director of Finance, is working right now on an asset management plan,
Yeah.
which will do exactly that.
Okay.
It'll determine what the life cycle is of each of our pieces of infrastructure, and what's the replacement cost, and then what is the annual contribution that is required for that. We do that now in bits. We do it on water and on sewer. So we have service fees that go into a fund that Kathy can explain in a little bit. So we're doing well on water and sewer. We don't do it at all really on streets or stormwater, other than capital reserve fund. And we do it well on rolling stock, equipment replacement reserve fund, which some of you are familiar with. And we contribute on an annual basis, and we project out the life cycle of those pieces of equipment. And we balanced out that contribution to an annualized figure, which is I think we do a really good job in some areas, but there's more work to be done. And Kathy's working on that.
And I just want to add, Councillor Paulson, I agree with you. Those sessions are very valuable when we're back and forth and asking questions. And I see that still as a part of this process. What you're talking about is the capital budget and those big projects. And we are going to go over the capital budget today as a start. I think the comment that CAO made was more regarding the operational budget that doesn't really change year to year unless we're looking at making service additions or service cuts. Yeah. Okay. Other questions from council? Any questions from Councillor Poon? Take that as a no. I'm not sure if she's still there. Hard to say. Okay. Okay. So thanks for making that presentation. Again, I think it's important that we understand how we got to the budget that we're at today. I also think it's important for us to recognize that just because the last council set that we were not going to go over 3%, we were in fact going to stay at 3%, doesn't mean that's the direction that we want to follow. I think we need to consider what we want our budget to look like, what our top priorities are. For our last council, infrastructure was the top priority, and it certainly, in my books, is a top priority still, but we want to consider what our priorities are for our budget. And I think more importantly than setting an arbitrary number of what our tax increase is going to be, we want to consider what the long-term needs of our community are and what our vision is for the community and how we're going to get there. So with that, we will start reviewing the budget. I'm going to leave this to you.
Yeah, drum roll. Great segue from Councillor Paulson around the round table format and capital and operating. There are three aspects to the budget that I would ask you to put your minds to. First is the operating budget. Second is a capital budget. And the third one is what we're calling a projects options list. So the operating budget, which we'll look at next, is that's where the bulk of the city's expenditures are. The operating budget essentially pays the day-to-day operating costs. Keeps the electricity bills paid, that kind of thing. And every department has an operating budget component. And then the capital budget is for the bigger pieces, the infrastructure, the equipment that's with us for multiple years. And some of the departments have a component of the capital budget. And we certainly should go line by line through the capital project, and that's where other managers and myself. After today, I think you won't hear from me much. You'll hear from the other managers, and they can tell you what each project means, and you can ask questions about that. And then the third piece, the projects options list. We've exercised this model for the last couple of years, I think with some success, where staff puts on a list projects that staff see as priorities, whether they're capital or operating, and we put them in front of council for your consideration. And if we're able to carve out some unallocated budget funding, which we have this year, I think $700,000. Is that right, Kathy? $600,000, which isn't as much as you'd like, but if you do nothing in the operating budget and nothing in the capital, and you just stay with what's in the draft, then you'll still have $600,000 that is currently unallocated that you can allocate to projects either that staff has suggested or that council suggests. And Madam
I
Mayor?
think it's important to note that that 600,000 is to bring us to the previous council's direction of a 3% tax increase. So it's not to say that we have to spend that 600,000 or it's unallocated at this time. If we want to stay at a 3% tax increase, we have $600,000 to work with.
Thank you for the clarification. That's correct. And I would ask that, so we're going to have another budget meeting January 28th, which is a week from now. I would ask that on the 28th of January, I'm hoping that by that meeting, we get through all the way through the options list in terms of telling you what each project is, a little bit about each project. And at the end of that day, you tell us what else is missing on the options list. So if you have things you want council to consider on the options list, that would be the time to populate the list. You can do it today too, or you can do it by the end of the 28th. Ideally, we would finalize the options list, and we would know then that there's no other new projects coming. And council now can consider this list of projects with this amount of money, and you always have the option to modify the tax rate as well. Does that work? So let's do I'll do a super high level flyover the operating budget. It would work well, I think, if council has questions on the operating budget. Tell us today, tell us next week, and then we'll have responses for you likely at the meeting after that. So we're probably not able to respond to all those, to give you answers to them today. So Davina, if you can take us to general revenue fund and revenue expenses, page 2, I think, in your agenda. So this is basically what our operating budget looks like, starting at this section. This is so the revenues, and you see general purpose taxes in 2019, $22,939,000, and next to it a percentage that shows how much of an increase it is over the previous year. And you can see that all the way across on that line. Last year we projected a 3% increase over the previous year, and likewise all the way through this 5-year financial plan, we're projecting a 3% lift on taxes. And that is because that was the direction of council previous to this council. You may or may not stay with that. What you want to do will determine what that rate is. Do you want to scroll page by page through this? Do you want me just to stop on some points that I think we want to speak to?
That's great.
Just keep blabbing? Okay.
Yeah. I think I mean, whatever you think is appropriate for, council's going to have their own questions. I think
Sure.
We want to give council a general understanding at this point.
Okay. In terms of general understanding, so the first couple of pages are revenue. And Davina, maybe if you just scroll down a little bit. You can see that the revenue streams come from far and wide. For many of our services also generate revenue or user fees. And then we'll get down eventually to a total revenue for the year, right there. So $37 million and 453,000. And you can see that that's a 2.74 increase over revenue from the previous year. So taxes at 3% are not the only source of revenue, and once you consider all the revenues, they're in under 3%. And the remainder of the operating budget, which we can scroll through now, is all the expenditures. And the bottom of the expenditures, hopefully it adds up to the same amount. It does. So it's what we anticipate spending, we're also bringing in. Davina, if you can just stop there on protective services. I want to point out an issue for council's attention. So I told you in 2017 when the direction was to meet 5% over 5 years in terms of operational cost increases. We weren't able to get there on police, even off the get-go. We just knew we couldn't get there. So we did the best we could. And we predicted a decrease in one uniformed officer in 2019. And that is still in the 5-year financial plan. So if you do nothing, if you just adopt that plan as it is, we're going to decrease one uniformed member this year. If you want not to do that, then you should tell us to put that item on the options list for your consideration later in this process. Okay?
Are there any questions from council at this point?
I have a question.
Councillor Solda?
Regarding the RCMP member, with all the crime in that, did we hire somebody in the last 4 years, or why are we going backwards? Because we've been wanting to increase?
I think we did increase from 33 to 34, probably 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. But that would be a good question for the inspector, probably at a subsequent meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
that will be a question, so
Perfect.
maybe you got that question.
Okay.
And just a question to clarify, the numbers that we see in 2018 amended are the numbers that we budgeted, not the actual spending numbers.
I'm looking at Kathy. I believe that's budget, right? That's right. That's a budget number, not an actual.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Corbeil?
Yeah, I went through this, and where I seen what appeared to be anomalies, I highlighted it, and I'll just run through a few for you.
If you could tell us
Mr. Klein?
the line number, that'll help us to track it.
Yes.
Let's
okay.
actually, could we just finish going over it in general terms? And then, because I've got a number of questions for specific lines as well.
Okay.
And let's maybe just have general overview, and then we'll all go through our specific line item questions,
Sounds
if that's okay.
Fair enough.
Sounds good. Davina, if we go back up, I think you'll find in IT a little further up around administration, information services. In information services, which is we all call IT, I'm not sure why, but they're the people who manage and keep our microphones working and that sort of thing. One of the things that we did in 2017 to get to that budget direction was we replaced our servers. I'm going to look at Jeff. I think that was a 2017 replacement, or was it 18?
We pulled out a fund because we were able to keep a fund for a year longer. So
Right.
we stopped making payments into it. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah. When did we actually replace them?
The money came to us in 2016. We
Yeah.
held it over to 2017 and made the purchase.
Thanks. So in 2017, we purchased new servers because we do that every 5 years, I believe.
We did.
And our practice had been to contribute to that equipment replacement reserve fund that I told you about to be able to purchase new ones again in 5 more years. So when they aged out at 5 years. So to get to that budget direction, we had some conversation around are servers the way of the future, or is the city going to go to the use of a cloud or some other method? Largely driven by budget, we stopped contributing to the replacement fund for the servers. And so now we're heading into our second year of not funding that replacement. We were supposed to, during 2018, get back to council with a report on that whole matter that was sort of out of budget season, and to say, look, here's the pros and cons of running your own servers versus a cloud or a combination. We didn't get that done. And I would suggest to you that we stay the course this year on the same course, and that staff get you a report this year, sometime between now and the fall, about whether or not we should be planning to replace our servers again. And if council says, no, you know what you want to do now, tell us and we'll make that change. So that's my suggestion, but you tell us what you want. Let's just scroll down, Davina. If we go slowly. The council's seen this, you have this document. You may have some questions. I don't know if I have much else to update you on in terms of this flyover. Again, the operating budget is our pretty much our day-to-day, year-to-year work, and it's not the larger projects that like road rebuilding and that kind of thing.
I think if that's all for the overview of the operating budget, that's fine. We can go through our questions.
I think at this point, those are the 2 items that I wanted to call council's attention to that we want not to lose track of.
Okay, I think that's great.
Okay.
So just a comment for me personally, I think if we are going to stick to the 1% operational spending going forward, as a council, we should put our minds to what is an allowable way to get to the 1%. I think personally, if we are trying to hold our spending to an acceptable level so that we can focus on infrastructure, that's great. But I don't think it does us any favors as a community to not contribute to IRF, to the equipment replacement reserve for something, just to keep our budget low. I think that just pushes us further away from our goal in the long run. I understand, the reasoning why we weren't contributing in this case is more to do with we aren't sure the direction we're going. But I think as a council, if that's going to be our direction going forward, we should think about how to get there. I don't think that pushing projects that need to be done to future years gets us really where we want to go. So just a comment. So I think now we'll go through whatever questions councillors have about the operational budget. Councillor Corb.
Madam Mayor, can I just jump in on
Yep.
your last comment? So I pointed out 2 items that council should put their minds to. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that each of our operations, all of our departments are under pressure one way or another. We've made staffing reductions to meet this budget direction. We've curtailed supplies and started to put things off, change the way we do things. All of our managers and the people that they represent are under pressure, not just because of the budget direction, but because of the constant drive for better and more services. And there's not less call for service, there's more. So I have to tell you that staff are engaged on trying to get to where the organization needs to get to, and council told us that's where you need to get to. If you want us to get it to a different place, then we're on board for that. But I don't want to just gloss over the fact that staff are struggling in some cases and could use assistance.
Thank
Thanks.
you. That's great. Councillor Corbeil, if you want to go through your questions first. And I think that, so any questions that can be answered now,
Sure.
if we can answer them, that's great. And if not, that's completely fine. Maybe we can just note them down and staff can bring back answers at subsequent meetings.
Okay, again, this is not being accusatory, it's more just trying to understand some of the variances. So the first question I have, Davina, it's on page 3, which would probably say 6 of 21 on your presentation. Under economic development, it goes up substantially from 42,000 to 126,000, so 199% increase, and then it drops 84% in the following year. Would that be because of cruise ships or something like that?
Kathy's going to answer that.
It's third item down.
For economic development, they had an operational grant that spanned 2 years. And that's the reason it went up. Like, there was $100,000 that was going to be used, I think, 2019. Yeah, it goes from 42 to 126 and then back down.
Okay, thank you. The next question is on the bottom of page 4. It's line item 15930 under miscellaneous revenue.
We can park those questions if we're not ready.
This was a huge change from, I don't know where we got $249,500 from, but unfortunately we don't have it this coming year. Was that another grant or something like that?
No, there was a deal with the Port Authority on the Clutesy development, which didn't go through, and they were going to put their accord payments into a trust. And then the development didn't go ahead, so we got 2 years at once. So that's up by about 180,000.
So is there real money sitting somewhere?
Yes.
Okay. That's good to know.
That's always good. Real money?
Where's the money hiding? Okay, I think Tim answered that question. Now, okay, and I guess my next question was on economic development, but again, I think you probably have answered that. Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Okay,
Thank you, Your Worship.
thank you. Councillors?
Up to you, buddy.
Councillor Paulson?
I'm good.
Okay, Councillor Solder?
Okay. Tim, when you were talking about the staff and everybody, I mean, everybody wants everybody to do more work for less dollars, and that's too bad. It's it seems to be not just with the city, it's with every business, and everything's more, especially with technology changing and that. And I'm big on the infrastructure. That's what I ran for, because I just believe our infrastructure is aging, and we know that, and we're not putting enough dollars into accounts and making general fixing up and stuff like that. My big thing is the IRF fund. I believe in the IRF fund, and I hate seeing the dollars go off. I believe if your roof is, you got a choice between a holiday or fixing your roof, what are you gonna do? You're gonna fix your roof. And so I don't, you should. And some people take the other and we'll fix the roof some other day. But in the city, it's a little different, and I believe in contingency funds for the same reasons. So I would like to see our fund keep going and stop dipping unless it's for what the projects are needed. And the big thing too, of course, is the RCMP, and with the crimes and stuff like that, I'd like to see something. Even if we keep the officer, I'd like to move forward on that, because this is what the community's been crying about, and they're worried. I mean, there's been break-ins that I know that happened yesterday, and we need to look after that situation. I have, what happens to, the server. I have a question regarding what happens to the old servers every 5 years. Do we sell them off, and does it go back into the fund? And if we have no budget for it, with the cost of servers, which technology is expensive and it changes all the time, I'd like to know what, for future presentations, what do other communities do? Do they do the cloud, or do they get their servers? So
Sure.
that's for future.
Yep, thank you.
Future question.
We can bring you the replacement costs at a future meeting in this budget process. And as I suggested, I'd prefer to take some more time to come back with that larger report, unless council wants to drive that faster.
No, I'm
Thank
okay
you.
with that, but I just want to bring that across, because
Yeah.
I don't want to be stuck with a big bill, and this community be stuck with a big bill at the end of the day, and we have no money for it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is important, and it's really hard to do, is not just to change or consider the services we provide, but to give ourselves permission to do things differently than we've done them before. And there's a real inertia when people care, like our staff care about the services they provide, and they're reluctant to stop doing things the way they've done them because that works. And if we're going to adapt to the changing world, I think we need to innovate, and we need to be prepared to take, in some cases, some risks on trying to do things different ways. And hopefully that makes them more effective or more efficient. But it's hard to let go of the things we know and the way we do things.
Yep.
So I appreciate that you're willing to look at that server as an example. Is there a different way? And if there isn't, then we'll go back to what we used to do.
Yeah. And one last one is the, to go back to the RCMP, I know we have a contingency fund for the murder investigations and future, and I'm not sure, is it $1 million? Has it been capped?
Well, it was capped at $1 million, and
I had capped it.
I think 2 years ago, council pushed the cap to $2 million because we were doing some other budgeting, trying to budget more tightly, and we recognized that we were budgeting tightly, so council allowed that cap to go to $2 million, and now I believe it's a little north of 1. Is that correct?
We're not near
Not near
2 million.
We're not near
So,
2.
so we are capped at 2 million.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm okay with that presently.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask that question. Thank you. Thank you.
Questions? No. I've got a few questions, just general things that I noticed looking through the budget. The first one is on Alberni Harbor Key, page 3, on the lease revenue, and there's quite a few different categories there. They're all shown at 1% increase. This is on the revenue side. I'm wondering if, I think our agreements are CPI, which this is not a huge difference, but I'm wondering why they're showing at 1%. And if this is an area as well, I mean, I personally lease regular commercial buildings for businesses, and I had one lease go up by 4.5% this year, and one lease went up by 5%. And I think this is an area where we need to make sure we are keeping on track with what is normal for leases of commercial space if we're going to be in the commercial leasing business. So we need to make sure that we're bringing in fair revenue for the assets that we have. So just a question on that, if you want to comment.
Noted, thank you. Did you want to comment
And
on
do
the
we,
1%?
yeah,
We can come,
sure.
thank you. We can come back with that.
Okay, that's great. I also have, on page 4, there's line 15190, vacant building registration permit fees, and we have $1,000 in there every year. I assume this means that if a building, a commercial building is vacant, they need to have a vacancy permit. I'm wondering if this is something that we actually apply.
We can,
Where does that $1,000 come from?
we can bring you an answer to that too.
Okay, thank you. The next question is which line or where do the bylaw tickets go?
Are they in fines and
Yes, the fines
and
and
parking?
tickets.
Fines and parking tickets.
So that'll be in fines and parking tickets.
Okay, so have we accounted, well, it's the same amount from last year. I'm wondering if we should account it all for the fact that we have increased bylaw officers. We're completing more files, we're issuing more tickets. Our bylaw strategy has changed a lot. I would expect we'll see an increase in that revenue.
I can tell you in a general sense, we budget on the revenue side very conservatively.
Okay,
And, but we'll look into that and come back with a response.
okay,
Yeah, so until we've, on the revenue side, until we see the demonstration of an actual from a previous year, we tend not to move up. So we're lagged a year or two on moving our revenues up because we don't want to over project
for sure.
on the revenue side.
Okay, that's great.
Madam Mayor, if I can comment on the bylaw piece, we're not there now on the screen, but this is in revenue, but under bylaw in the expenditure side, you'll note that there's a significant increase this year in bylaw. And that was because we created the department last year, and we've recognized this year we need to create some structure around that and support a little bit of money for training, for example, and things like that. So percentage-wise, it looks like a significant increase. It's not a big dollar increase,
Okay.
and I'm confident there's going to be a offsetting revenue, but we just haven't projected that because we're conservative.
Okay. Another question on page 6, and it's other common services, which is line 21259. I'm just curious, I guess, what that item is generally, and then it went from 342,000 to 494,000. So a large jump. So just a general answer on that, if you.
Other common services is telephone or other expenses that are citywide that aren't allocated to a particular department. And the jump for that is, as you know, the province cut the MSP premiums to 50%, but they also added the employer health tax. So we are $150,000 higher for 2019 because we'll be paying both. And rather than smack the departments with all of that, and it's nothing they can control, is put it into other common services and have that identified as its own expense.
Thank you. That's helpful. Just 2 more questions. Under protective services, line 22121, which is obviously the general police services contract. We go from 5.35 million to 5.43 million. Which says it's a 1.44% increase. That is, just to confirm, still, $100,000 more. That includes a reduction of an officer. Okay. And then my last question, general equipment on page 8, line 23160. We have general equipment maintenance, and I noticed that it goes down by $16,000. I'm wondering if our fleet of whatever general equipment we're maintaining has reduced, or if that's just an arbitrary reduction.
No, the fleet is the same number of vehicles. there's likely a little less maintenance because there are some newer ones, and also some research would have been done into the actuals and the trends, and the budget adjusted. That's very likely why it
Okay.
went down.
That's great. That's all the questions I have on the operating budget. Council, any other questions on the operating budget? No? Okay. Then at this time, I think we'll move into the capital budget. And Council, if you have more questions as we go through it more, or, you know, if go home and review it more, feel free to email questions prior to our next budget meeting, and then we can try to have answers at the budget meeting. CAO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So let's look at, let's go to capital. And then, is there any, Madam Mayor or Council, is there any interest in hearing about our reserve funds? So maybe if Ms. Rothwell wouldn't mind summarizing the reserve funds and what they're for, that sort of thing. And then we can get into capital shortly after that. So I think capital will exhaust the rest of the day. So, Madam Mayor, it would help if you would tell us what in general do you want to know about reserve funds? Just what they're for? What the criteria are?
I think a general overview of the reserve funds that we have. And I know some of them, it's at our discretion what we pull out of them, and some of them have more specific requirements. So maybe just high-level understanding of it at this point, and then if council has specific questions, they can raise their hands and ask anytime.
Okay, we have some statutory reserve funds that are required by the province that we have, like land sale, parkland acquisition, and some other ones that council has set up for bylaw. And for specific types of projects, like our capital works reserve, we have our anything to do with projects that we have in public works. Capital works funding can go for that. The ERF, the Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund, that's contributed to by all the departments. And then the equipment purchases are taken out. It's like a savings account. We have a carbon trust reserve that's put aside for projects and equipment that would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, that kind of thing. We have, I think, 7 or 8 of the funds. I can't remember exactly right off the top of my head. I'm ad-libbing here too. But they're set up to cover a specific type of expense that we always want the money there for. And if we, the land sale reserve is a good example. If we want to buy land, the money would come out of there. Or if we sold city land, the money would go back into there. And is that general enough for you? I can go through each of them and sort of describe them if you'd rather that.
You want to go through each of them?
I would like to. I think it would be good for the public who are also going to be watching to understand what we
Sure.
have for reserves.
Yeah, if you don't mind just giving a brief explanation of what each of them is used for, that would be great.
Okay, so Davina, if we start here, that would be great. Okay, the parkland acquisition is primarily when there's a subdivision put in and we want parkland. We get cash from the developer, or we can get land, or if we want to buy or sell parkland, it goes in there. It's not a huge balance, but it's a bit of a cushion if we want to do something. Parks and Recreation Capital Reserve, this wasn't separated out in prior years. I did this year because we're up to about $2 million in it, and this was originally set up quite a few years ago. I think in the top right-hand corner, there's a date that it was established. And I believe the purpose was to save up for a down payment for the pool, for replacing the pool. And this can get tapped into periodically for parks and recreation projects at council's discretion. I talked about the Capital Works Reserve one already. The gas tax that we get from the federal government flows through this account as well. And we talked about IRF. And if we sell equipment, yes, it goes back in, the proceeds from the sale. And the trades go in. We don't account for the trades in the IRF because we never know how much it is going to be, and that tends to build up a cushion too. So if a garbage truck estimate comes in too high, then we know that we've got trade-in value that we can use. Okay, land sale reserve, we sell property, we buy property. We can also use this to make improvements to municipal buildings. The development cost charges is fairly new. That was set up for development. There's, I think, 12 different bank accounts on this one for water and sewer and connections. And Scott Smith would be very much more able to explain the ins and outs of this one, but he's not here. But that comes from the development permits.
Okay, thank you.
And Carbon Trust, for the ecologically friendly improvements that we want to do. I think the last thing we bought was an electric Zamboni to replace the propane one. And the Community Forest Reserve, this one was set up for some dividend funds that were paid out. The city's a shareholder of the AV Forest. And they're doing the logging, and then if they have, if their board of directors decides to pay out a dividend, then that goes into here. And then that's also distributed at council's discretion.
So the dividend that we heard about at our last council meeting will be additional to the amount that's in there right now.
When I get a letter from the lawyer, I'll
Yes.
record it.
Yeah, thank you.
And Cemetery Trust, this is where we're selling plots. And this has to stay in, it's a trust for future care. And we've just adjusted our bylaws, our cemetery bylaws, to increase the fees to make it so we can actually look after the cemetery with the funds that we do earn. And that 2,000 transfer to general revenue, that's about all of the investment income we get on it right now. And hopefully that we'll be able to grow that.
I think that's it.
Yeah, the cemetery trust is not available to put on any projects. It's a trust.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Paulson?
Just going back to the Capital Works Reserve Fund and the New Deal gas tax funds, and we're at 1.1 million last year and just over $1 million for this year, and then it drops to 519, 359, 160. What's the rationale in projecting that significant drop in that particular number?
Capital projects that don't, that aren't identified as tapping
yet.
into the gas tax.
Okay.
There tends not to be so much detail in the capital projects further out. Things change every year.
Other questions from council on the reserves? Councillor Corbeil?
Yeah, on, this would be page 24, expenses, transfer to capital works bylaw. Again, it's 685,900 this year, and then next year, 2,293,000, and then the following year, 2,661,000. What's the rationale for the huge increase?
Okay, I should have hidden the line that was transferred to capital works bylaw, because that was for something else several years ago when council directed us to move $1 million. That's equipment purchases, and we have back-to-back fire trucks. That's what the 2.2 million is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And you don't have to necessarily comment on this today, but my question is, do we have an indicator of the health of the equipment replacement reserve fund? And I know that over the last 4 years, our last term, there were many situations where we were making a purchase and the amount that we had saved was not adequate for the purchase. I know a part of that was, the Canadian dollar and things coming from the United States. But is that a general trend that we're seeing? And should we be looking at increasing our contributions, or have we? And just a follow-up to that, I know when we first got elected to council, we did see a spreadsheet of the Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund that kind of showed what the expected purchases were and where we were at with funding. And so I'm wondering if that's something that we have still, and just basically if that fund is healthy or if we need to look at changing what we're doing.
The fund is healthy. I've been, we did a lot of work on it a few years ago to look with that $1 million transfer out of IRF into Capital Works. That compromised the IRF at, I think it runs out to, have it projected out to 2031, and it wasn't going to meet what we needed. So 5 or 6 years ago, the IRF contributions were increased by 3% a year, and that's continuing to get that balance back to being sustainable. So yes, we're very conscious of that, and with the operational budget every year, because the IRF contributions are coming out of the operational budgets. It is healthy, yes, it's sustainable, but we still do have to continue on that course. And what happens, we review the equipment replacement every year to see, okay, this dump truck's got another 5 years in it, so let's leave it till then, and then we've got another 5 years of our contributions in it. And yes, there's some external pressures definitely on it, but this is where the trade-ins and the investment interest and, or if we are able to recover money from, private sale or something like that, that's where we get the cushion from when we need to tap into it a little bit more.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so if there are no other questions on the reserve funds, we will start with the capital budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So maybe Davina can make that just a little larger. So just in terms of orienting to the documents, so in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see 2019 capital projects budget. There will be several pages of lines of the 2019, and then we'll get into a similar format for 2020, and then 2021, and each subsequent year after that. The bulk of the projects you'll see are in 2019. Along the top of the page, you'll see budgeted costs. So that's the all-in cost for the item in the left-hand column. And then there's a number of different revenue sources that we could draw from, or we'll identify from where the revenue is coming. So if it's coming from, you see the line general revenue operating and reserves. General revenue operating means taxation in the current year. And Kathy, am I correct that general revenue reserves is taxation from a previous year and held over?
Yes, and that has been approved.
Approved in a previous year. Yeah, so sometimes we may not have got a project done in a previous year, so the money's carried forward and it's in general revenue reserves. Thank you, Kathy. Or it might come from land sale reserve or equipment replacement reserve fund or borrowing, God forbid, but it does. Gas taxes, federal provincial assistance. There might even be some columns further to the right, grants, that sort of thing. Yeah, that would be federal provincial assistance. Or our own reserve fund. So as we go through the projects, you'll see, Davina, if you can take us back to the left, you'll see that what the budgeted cost is, and then how much, generally what's of most interest is how much is coming from operating, general revenue operating for each project, because that impacts taxation in the current year. So bearing that in mind, and then as we go through, you'll see they're broken up into kind of department by department sections, and in some cases they're broken into multiple, one project might be reflected in multiple areas, and we can talk about those as we go through. So I'm going to do a high level. I'm not going to ask other managers to speak today on these, but at subsequent meetings you'll see other managers here talking more in detail about each project. So again, the administration piece, purchasing equipment replacement, that's IT, and there's some software for mapping and GIS. And those are funded from, one from IRF and the other from gas tax. so not from taxation this year. Scrolling down, fire department. And I should say, council, these are in the draft plan. They're in there because they were approved by council in a previous 5-year financial plan. If they weren't, if there's a new project that emerges, unless it's a safety issue that we just have to do, if it's a safety issue, we'll put it in the plan. If it's if it's an emerging project that council previously has not approved, it'll be on the options list. Okay, just for your awareness. So fire department, we, as Ms. Rothwell told you, we're expecting a ladder truck in 2020, and in preparation for that ladder truck, which might need a bigger space to be stored in, we've got $88,000 from gas tax funds to do some structural preparation. So we know there's some ducting and things we have to move, and there may even be some structural change. So that's what that's related to, just getting prepared for the new ladder truck. There's also some portable radios, pagers. If you look to the right, you can see they're both moved up from 2021 to the current year. And that's not an uncommon thing to see a project move forward or backwards in the plan. If we think there's more life in some equipment, we'll push it out to a subsequent year. And likewise, if we think the equipment needs replacing sooner than we had anticipated, we'll move it forward to a more current year. So that's what's happening with the portable radios and the pagers.
Do we not contribute to those, to IRF for those?
If we did, they would be in IRF, so we do not know.
Okay. Can we, I'm just wondering if we should, when we're pulling things out of, or equipment, or funding for equipment out of general revenue, if we should then start contributing to IRF for it for the next replacement, and if we have a policy to do that or not?
We'll bring back a response on that at a subsequent meeting. I know in the past we have, as we've come across things, we've said, wow, we should IRF that going forward, and we have.
Okay.
Yeah, and so we can bring back a summary on what our criteria are for IRF eligibility. Fire hall as well, the generator. This is carried forward from 2018. The funding was approved in 2016. So there's an example of previous funding. That project hasn't been completed yet. On that one, because it wasn't in the Equipment Replacement Reserve Fund, Council in 2016 approved spending money from the IRF and paying that money back over a 5-year period. So we're double contributing for that item. So that's fairly unusual to do. Under transportation services, you can see there's a number of those that are moved to 2021. So that is largely to do with our staff assessing the equipment that were due for replacement this year and saying there's more life in these in this equipment, so we'll push it out to a subsequent year. So kudos to staff on that. And a little further down, you'll see that we're moving one forward from 2022 to 2019. So if you have questions on the vehicles that we're replacing and the rationale behind them or the use of those vehicles, there will be an opportunity for you to ask a staff member at a subsequent meeting. Going down to paving and road construction. So here's where it can get a little bit challenging to follow the budget. If you have pick Bird Street, 11th Avenue to Estan, for example, we've got 650 meters of road construction with, I believe PTP means prior to paving, and there's some, so there's a bit of code work going on there. That one's moved out to 2022, but you'll find that project will be reflected there under paving and road construction. It'll also be reflected later possibly under storm water, and also under water and under sewer. So that one project might be broken up into 3 or 4 different areas in the budget. And part of the rationale for that is that we don't have reserve funding for paving and road construction. So generally that comes out of gas taxes or general revenue. We do have reserve funding for sewer and water. So we tend to show them in the category under which they're funded. So looking at those paving and road construction projects, again, at a subsequent meeting, you'll have an opportunity to talk to department staff about each of these projects. But there's a Beaver Creek widening project that has been in the hopper for a little while. Some street repairs that are often driven by the replacement of the infrastructure underground. And And you'll see those projects reflected further down. And there's 3 projects there you can see are moved out to subsequent years. Davina, if we can scroll down a little bit. So again, storm, some of those projects are similar to the paving ones you saw above. If we're rebuilding the street, we're sometimes changing the piping underneath. And the storm project, in general, we're moving towards separating storm and sewer. And part of the older parts of town, storm and sewer are combined. And we're working toward, it's a multi-year project, moving toward developing capacity to separate those out. And you can see that there's not a lot of these projects coming from general revenue. They're coming from other sources. Works other. Again, you'll have an opportunity to talk to managers about these, the specifics of them. The Grandview Walkway project, you likely recall that the previous council wrestled with this project. They were, excuse me, petitioned by neighbors to make a safer pathway, pedestrian pathway, between Otter Place and Compton Road. And so what council elected to do was to put $100,000 into the budget for 2019, which you'll see there. There's also a $25,000 component on the options list, which you'll look at next week, and you'll consider. And we think it's going to take $125,000 to essentially build out a paved shoulder for that project. So even though it may sound like the option to pave is $25,000, we think the project's $125,000, and the best use there is to pave out, is to close in some of that ditch and pave out a shoulder, and rather than put a pathway behind the ditch. But again, you can ask Mr. Takamo about that at a later date.
Just a question on that one to note for going forward. I'm curious on that one. Is that project our largest safety and project need? And I only ask that because it came forward in a political way to council. Doesn't mean it's not the best project for our money. I think I was hoping when we discussed it last year to hear from staff on whether they felt that project should be a top project or, I'm sure you can infer the question from that. And I know that might be a difficult thing to answer, but when projects do come forward, I think from the community with political push, I think we need to be looking back to our staff to ask if they should be top priorities or not. Thanks.
Thank you. You'll see McLean Mill Dam repairs, $233,000. You'll recall that this council committed $200,000 at the end of 2018 from our contingency budget last year to that project. We've spent some of that money to date, and the projections that we have for the remainder of the dam remediation tells us we'll need another $33,000. So that is in the budget, not on the options list by the look of it. So if council wants to, that is one item where council may want to discuss something that's already in the capital plan. Yeah, scrolling down. So Cultural Services McLean Mill capital projects. In each of the 5 years, we are showing $125,000 for capital for McLean Mill. And we have a meeting this afternoon where you'll learn more about McLean Mill and the use of the capital funds versus the operating funds. 95,000 of that comes from the city, and 30,000 of that comes from the regional district. Passes through the city's hands to McLean Mill Society. There are a number of lists, a list of projects under Parks, Recreation, and Heritage. These were all approved by council for 2019 in a previous 5-year plan. So you'll see them here again in the budget. There were a couple other ones that were approved last year that we've actually moved out to the options list because we felt that they were really subject to council's strategic plan, your plan. So rather than presume that you were going to proceed with those, we've moved them over to the options list for your consideration. And then waterworks, you can see the costs for these projects, and none of those costs are coming from operating funds, so not coming from current year taxation. They're all coming for water, they're all coming from the water fund. So property owners pay a water service fee and a sewer service fee, and those fees go into a water and a sewer fund and are drawn on for these kinds of projects. So for some of these projects, they're aligned with the road construction projects, which means we're going to rebuild the road over top afterwards. Some of them not. Some of them we can just trench and patch or do the work in the boulevard. And you can see there's a lot of capital work there to be undertaken on water and likewise sewer below. Go down just a bit more, please, Davina, or up, I guess, up. Treatment and pumping. There's some project work we've discussed previously with council around the Aerosmith Reservoir pumps, and that's the top of Bird Street. So there's some work to be done up there to support water supply for the developing residential projects up there. But considerable spending, $4 million in water capital. Sewer system, again, some of these projects will be undertaken at the same time as water projects or road construction projects. Trying to see if there's anything of high interest there. Again, at a subsequent meeting, you'll be able to ask questions about each of those projects. So a total 2019 capital of $7,687,000. So that's a significant contribution to capital. Not most of it coming from current year taxation. Madam Mayor, any questions on that? That was a kind of a fast flyover for 2019.
Council, any questions? Councillor Solda?
I'll save mine for managers.
This is probably, again, for managers, but
Yeah.
I'm just giving you the heads up.
Sure.
When you talk about the fire department and the equipment that's being replaced, I'd like to know the age of the equipment and all the whys, and because on the trucks and the vehicles and that, we have age, but we don't have the age on the equipment, and I'm kind of curious. I always like to know that.
Okay, you think of the radios and the pagers that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And the other one is to do with the fire department. When you talk about the truck might be too big to fit in, why are we getting a bigger truck? And that can be addressed too. I'm sure it will be addressed. The other one is regarding the water and the pipes. About 5-6 years ago, there was a presentation made to council by a consultant saying we had to put so much money into our reserves because our pipes are aging. And I would like... Pardon?
Econics. The report's available on the city's website.
And so I would like to, thank you, and I would like to know how far are we off track to that? Because we weren't putting away the money at the time, and in the future generations, they'll be paying.
I can tell you we've done some heavy lifting while you were away.
And a lot of increases.
And we're a lot closer now than we were, but we'll bring back that specific
I
information.
would like to know, because that was always a bee in my bonnet on
Okay.
that, and because we weren't putting away the money. The other thing too is, oops, I'm moving my line. And are we in line with the replacement of the pipes? Are we patching them or are we actually replacing them?
Sure.
I would like to know that, because you had said patch, and I thought, oh, okay, let's talk about it. I noticed on the reports and that there was nothing about sidewalks. I know we have some really aging sidewalks that need to be addressed, as well as wheelchair accessibility, because I've had the public say they have had some issues, and you watch one of the little scooters go on, they kind of lean when they go up on, and that's not a great thing, because if somebody takes a dump there, that's not, it would not be fun. When you kind of to zip through it, but the pier for Canal Beach and that, there was the park. Are we looking at having the service groups looking at the parks, because we had talked about that in the past, and also a pier for the Canal Beach? I would like to know where we are at that, because it kind of zipped over there. And
Can we go back to that, Davina? It would be parks projects.
And I know at one point we had said no, and we would address it a few years back, so I'd like to know where that's at. And the pilings, I believe there was a study done on the pilings to see if they were fine.
So on that point, I believe that we've taken that out of the plan.
Yes.
It was actually in the plan last year, and there was a couple projects at Canal Beach, a little further down. Oh, no, you're right there. Yeah, we've moved them out. So we moved into the options list because we thought that that was subject to this council's
Okay,
strategic direction. And we didn't want to presuppose, even though the previous council said, yes, do it in 2019, we thought we'd move it out and let you reconsider that.
sounds great.
But
Okay,
we did do, to your point, we did check out the pilings, and they're sound and competent to build on if we choose to do that.
and that's why Mr. Scott Kenny at the time really wanted to keep those pilings in.
Yeah.
And the final question is regarding the walk-in cooler. I'd like to know how old and why, because restaurants don't replace them that often. And is it from day one? But what's wrong and why are we replacing it?
Okay.
And that's the end of my questions at this moment. Thank you.
And I'll just add to that, thank you for bringing forward the sewer and water. I think it would be great to add that report, I think it's 2 separate reports, to maybe not the 28th budget meeting, but the one after that.
Okay.
And do a quick high-level overview of them for council, because I think sewer and water, that report that was done and subsequently followed by the last council, that's a huge success.
Yeah.
Because, although a lot of people don't see increasing sewer and water fees as a huge success, I think we have shown there that we can plan for our assets and properly fund them. And I think where we often get held back now is not having the money for the paving side of things. So I think that would be great for council to get a better understanding of, and for the public as well. I have found that report on the city's website and shared it on social media probably 20 times when people are upset about sewer and water fees. So I think we should show that the fees are increasing so that we can responsibly maintain our assets, and get a better understanding.
I agree.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to be really clear, because this is kind of my first kick at the can here. These aren't written in stone, so if you see other priorities, like, for example, you mentioned the Grandview Walkway, if we think there's something that's a higher priority than that one, you can push that one down and put the priority one there?
Yeah, so
Is that
nothing
correct?
here is written in stone.
Okay.
I think what's important to understand is what's currently in the capital and operating budget. If we pass the budget as is, that's what's in. What's on the options list, which is after this, those are not in the budget right now. So those are the things we have to decide if we want to put them in. We can also add other projects if we want to add other projects. But we still have the opportunity. This is just the first draft of the budget. If we want to give direction to take these projects out, add other ones in, we can do whatever we want right now. Any other questions from council? Okay. So I think the next thing we have, unless there's anything else you want to add, CAO?
I would like to look at least 2020 in the capital.
Yep.
So please bear in mind you're considering a 5-year plan, and there's a strong tendency to look at the next year, but we really should be planning out longer term. And because the things you approve in the 2020 year of this plan are going to show up in your draft plan next year. So if you don't want them in there next year, don't put them in this year. Just be mindful of what's coming, what you're approving in subsequent years.
I think that's great. So if we do that, and then I do want to just do a quick overview of what's on the project option list as well. So just like you're doing the capital, and then we want to leave a bit of time for any public input before our 3 p.m. meeting.
Okay.
So we've got 35 minutes.
Perfect.
Keep that in mind.
Maybe a 5-minute flyover 2020.
Okay, that's great.
You can see similar recurring projects in administration. There's a replacement of a vehicle there that wasn't in last year. There's a server refresh moved forward from 2021. We can bring you more information on that. Fire department, a project of a pump test pit that's been pushed forward, and it's coming due now. Replacement of a small pickup truck and the ladder truck that we talked about. That might be too big. The chief can give you input on that. It just the structural preparation is in case we can't find a truck that's the same size as what they want to have for the most part, or if we need a truck that's bigger. Transportation services, you can see a lot of vehicle replacements in 2020, where there were very few in 2019, and those again will be considered next year, and they may be able to be pushed out. Paving and road construction, pretty aggressive schedule there. Moving down. Lots of storm drain work in 2020. installation of new mains. Most of that storm is coming from general revenue in that year, as you can see. Parks, our park staff are really good at forecasting. They're doing some really good planning work. So you'll see a robust list of projects coming from them, as we've seen starting probably last year and going forward. They're projecting a lot of needs. Yeah, so some of these were moved to 2019 options list. Again, McLean Mill funding, that's consistent through the 5 years. And then a number of Parks, Recreation, and Heritage projects. You have some aging infrastructure across the city, but even in recreation. So there's some things that we need to put our minds to replacing. So, Madam Mayor, that's the flyover look. This might not feel really productive for council, but it's very helpful for staff to get your questions in this kind of format. So when we come back next week, we'll be prepared with some of the specific information you want.
Are there any
Thank you.
questions on that part on the 2020 capital? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No?
I'll ask later.
Do you want to look at options list? Or where do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think next if we could do just an overview of the projects that we
Sure.
have, one by one, very high level of
Okay.
the projects on the option list. And then if council does feel there's anything missing from there, we can talk about that as well.
Okay, thank you. So on this document, again, these are the things that, a list of items at this point that staff would like council to consider funding. And basically the sponsoring manager for each of these projects will be more than happy to explain to you why these should be priority projects. And excuse me. So the format we're looking at here is similar. You'll see the budgeted cost and then from where we anticipate drawing the revenue. And there's a column there to say if it's a capital expense or a non-capital. It's in the end, where the money comes from is likely of high interest to council. Whether it's in the operating budget or capital budget may be of less interest to you. So I won't speak to these projects unless there's something that jumps out as a previous direction of council. Well, I'll speak to the first one, bylaw security enhancement program. In 2018, council put $25,000 in the budget for an incentive program or a grant program for security measures for private property. And council may want to consider making that an annual recurring budget item. Planning, while council's doing their strategic plan, you may also want to consider updating the official community plan, which I think is 12 years dated at this point. There's some fire hall projects there that the chief can speak to. In transportation, our director of engineering and public works is driving at this point driving a vehicle that's I think due to a vacant position at the works yard, but we're going to need another vehicle for the director to drive. There's a number of projects, LED lighting upgrades. That has previously been, that kind of project's been of interest to council. Maybe upgrading some main road street lights, undefined project, but $50,000 if council wants to do some work there. There's been discussion around traffic circles. Does council want to undertake the engineering work to study the potential for a traffic circle? There's some paving options there over and above what is already in the capital plan. Does council want to do some additional paving? Last year, I think we put, was it 50 or 100, Kathy, do you recall, into additional paving?
I think it's 50.
I can't recall. We put Wilf, do you recall? 50 the year before. So thinking that we were falling behind on paving, so that was somewhere between a large paving project and patchwork. So does council want to do be more aggressive on some paving? There's some storm work, traffic upgrades. Again, the Grandview walkway, $25,000 more than was originally budgeted for that project. You know, I suppose we could just throw 125 in the capital plan for that project, But now that we've talked about it, you understand that that project's going to cost $125,000 if we go ahead with it. And the Beaver Creek widening project. Long list of park projects. Considerable list, a lot of good things we could do there, right? And some parks and recreation facilities. When we've heard council begin to talk about tree planting, so does council want to consider a more aggressive program for planting trees? So we thought we'd put an item there for that. Fireworks. You likely would have attended the Quality Food sponsored fireworks show during Salmon Fest. There was a proposal pending that the city be a co-sponsor of that. So we've brought that here for your consideration. Do you want the city to be a co-sponsor of that QF fireworks display? Mr. Deacon can speak to that at a subsequent meeting. I think that might be it. And then whatever else council wants to add to that list for council to consider.
Okay.
So that's what the options list looks like.
Thank you.
You might want to point out the asks as opposed to the money available.
Yeah, we recognize that there's a longer list there than there appears to be money available to undertake. And this isn't intended to put council in a tough spot. In fact, in a previous year, council did say to staff, you didn't bring us enough projects to consider, enough infrastructure projects. So these are things that staff are seeing as directions they'd like to go, like to see the city go, and not meant at all to put you in a box.
And again, I think it's important to note that at the bottom, that part that Councillor Paulson's referring to, that there's available funds from operations plan, 600,000, and from gas tax, 100,000, and then the total of everything on the options list is 1.978 from general. Again, that is if we want to meet a 3% tax increase. So we could add nothing to the options list and have a smaller tax increase. We could add more. This is just a guideline based on last council's direction. So 600,000 is not a firm number that we need to get to or not get to. So council, any questions on the options list? Council Solda?
We all would like to have a 0% tax increase, but you know what, it's going to get us further and further behind in our projects that we already are further and further behind. So catching up, and it's going to cost more as we go along. But anyways, my comment is on all these option projects, is there grants associated to them? I know like parks, there's always a grant, there's different things. Do you have a rough estimate, or can you come back when projects are presented that we could apply for grants for these?
We'll come back to a subsequent meeting and tell you if there's grants pending for any of these.
Yes.
But at this point, I'm not able to answer that.
Especially with the government's election years are coming up, and this is a great time to apply for grants. Regarding the enhancement program, security enhancement program, I would like to see it. I know about it, but a lot of people don't know about it because there's a lot of new business owners and that, and I'd like to see it advertised on our Facebook page, more information given out what it is, because it would be great to see people utilize that program, and that would help with the security in the RCMP. The other one is the LED lighting upgrades. When that's presented back to us, I would like to know what the cost savings would be approximately. I know it's really hard without doing that, but I'd like to see the payback.
How long the payback is?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
Okay, and street lighting upgrades too. I know we do partnerships with ICBC and different areas, and I'd like to see if there's any future partnerships that we can do. Paving, I would like to see actually upgrading. No, I get tired of the patchwork, and because we seem to patchwork, and also the other thing too is that I want to be clear that I don't want to, when we do the upgrades, I don't want to, some people have said, well, why are we just digging this up again? We just put it down, like let's get it all in place and put it down, and because it's cost, right? All about dollars. And I'm sure there's reasons in that if we're going to move pipes and different things, but I'm really big on it. Let's plan for that. And park projects, there's a lot there, and we do need some upgrading, and I'll be interested to see more discussion on the park projects. The last thing is the beautification projects for the community. That's big on my list because we hear a lot of people comment about, we seem to have 4 sectors in our community. We have Johnson Road, the upper Johnson Road, as some businesses. I'd love to be all one. And of course, Redford, and then 3rd Avenue. So how do we deal with that? And how much money do we put into beautifications? And I know the previous council had the enhancements and different things, and I would like to continue with that because I love what's happening with the existing buildings that have taken advantage of it. So those are my just comments for future discussions. Thank you.
And just to add to that, our manager of bylaw at the back is telling me, and I think I read in the newsletter that just went out with the utility billing as well, that the the security program is just launching. So I would imagine we're right today. Today it's launching.
I haven't got my bill yet.
So we will, I'm sure, be hearing more about it. And there was a write-up about it that went out with our utility bills. So that's a great start.
And the press is here today. They can talk about it.
They'll be writing about it, I'm sure. Thank you. Other questions from council or comments? Councillor Washington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Under works other, the Grandview Walkway and the Beaver Creek widening, those dollar figures are all based on our guys doing the work, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Looking forward to meeting the managers.
Okay, thank you. And just one comment I think for myself is that because we are in a position where we don't have a strategic plan in place yet, I think it's not a bad idea for us to consider putting some money away and maybe being super critical of the projects that we do put into our budget this year, thinking about, generally maybe what our direction is going to be, the direction we're heading. And if we're going to put projects in before we have a strategic plan, I think they need to be very important projects. And we can always consider putting money away in our budget that could be saved and spent later in the year when we kind of figure out what our strategic initiatives are going to be. So just something to consider when we're going through the budget. I think that's it. Anything else for you to add before we get to public input?
No, I'll apologize for me droning on all day. This is a necessary first meeting, and then after this, it'll get a lot more interesting. I promise.
This is very interesting.
Okay.
So if there's no further questions from council, we will open it up if any members of the public have questions or would like to just give input. No one? Okay. Well, if there's no questions and council review we've done, then would somebody like to move adjournment?
So move that way.
Is there a seconder? All in favor? Carried. Thank you everyone for joining us.